Hey friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com. Yesterday I released my Vieville by Benedetti, and I mentioned that I would be creating another video to release today, which was really 10 minutes after I did the other one, comparing the Marco's deck with the Sivilixi. But then I realized that I also had another deck that was really close to being a facsimile deck, and most people might even consider it a facsimile deck. And that is the one that was created by Peterson, in 2021. So I decided that for this video, I'll compare Marco's with those two other decks, the Peterson and the Sivilixi by Patrick Koch. Now, I had mentioned in my other video, and sometimes I forget things where I don't remember clearly, so I apologize for that. But I mentioned that I wasn't sure if the extant deck in the National Library of France had been sheets or if they had been an actual deck that was preserved. And it was an actual deck, like cut out and everything like that. It wasn't from sheets that were found at the National Library. So this deck that has been reproduced is in fact an extant deck, meaning that there aren't any cards that were missing, and it was in the form of a deck of cards. So perhaps it was passed down by a family. Now, I did also mention that I have some coins that I thought looked or reminded me of being similar to the coins in this deck. However, those coins were not French, so I'm not going to show them, but I do have some French coins, and one in particular was minted in 1656, which would have been around in keeping with the date of this deck, which is given to be somewhere between 1643 and 1664. That is when it is known that Jacques Vieville was publishing. Most publishers, that when they recreate the deck or they publish the deck, will say 1650 because that's right smack dab in the middle. But the deck could have been created anytime in between those two dates. So the one coin that I have from 1656, I'm going to hold. It doesn't have the same image on the back or on the front. This one is like a fleur-de-lis. But I love, and then the front is, some person, I don't know, whoever was probably the king or something at that period of time. But I love holding coins from the period of time when a certain deck was created, because I love to imagine that this coin passed hands in a game of tarot or a game of cards, and it's just fun for me to imagine that. The other coins that I have from France, this one is from not related to the Vieville, but I think it's interesting. Every now and then I like to drag them out and show you. This one is from 1341 to 64. You can see it's in such condition, but it's got the cross. And then that on the front, or I'm not sure which is the front, which is the back. And now I have one that would have been probably in keeping with the Dodal. So this one could have been in the pocket of somebody who was playing a card game using the Dodal from 1710. I have two. I have one from 1710 and one from 1711. But the one from 1710 would fit in just right. I'm not sure which one this is because I can't see it so good. But yeah, that. And then, isn't that an interesting image? I'm not really sure what's going on in that one. And then I have one from 1770, also French. Ooh. I just thought it would be fun to show. I'm not sure who she is or he is. I can't see so well even with my glasses. And then we have fleur-de-lis which obviously was a very common motif for France. Still is. All right, I just thought that would be a fun little diversion to show. Oh, right. So I'm going to flip the camera and I'll be showing you my 3 facsimile decks, Marco Benedetti's, Joseph Peterson, and then Patrick Coke, the Sivilixi deck. Okay, so each deck is in front of its respective box. Marco Benedetti, Joseph Peterson, Patrick Coke, Sivilixi. Now, I'm not sure how much it shows up in the camera, but in person, the one in the center by Peterson, the orange has been toned down to a bit more like a salmon, whereas the Sivilixi and Marco's decks are just about pretty much identical in the shade of the orange and the yellow. We see here in the Peterson that the yellow is also a little bit brighter. I put the Peterson in the center because I think that would show to greatest advantage how Peterson's is just a little bit cleaner. You know, they took the original and then maybe cleaned up. And in some spots you'll see it. I mean, certainly we have some over extension of color, which he kept. He didn't change that. But every now and then there's a smudge on the deck that like you see this smudge here, which is here in the Sivilixi, but oh, yep, it's there too. So, you know, I must say the Peterson deck is pretty close to also being a facsimile. It is a bit smaller, just a tad bit smaller. Pretty close in size, but still a little smaller. Whereas the Sivilixi and Benedetti's are the same size. And of the 3, the card stock of Marco's is different than the other 2. The other 2 have a bit of a glossy finish. You can see a bit of a glare, right? This is totally a matte finish. Of course, all 3 have the same back, maybe slightly varied in color. But those are the Vieville backs. Probably because there's 3 decks, I'll probably end up just showing the Triumph cards and then do the pip cards. So all 3 show this little smudge. We see that little smudge there. And we all see, you know, in all 3, we see the break in the lines. We see these little dots. So all 3 really are, you know, very true. True in keeping with the original. It's just that the Peterson, I think, just brightened up the color a little bit. But on some occasions, I did notice that he cleaned up smudges or blobs of ink. And it is a little different in size. The other 2 are almost exact with one another. Now in the Sivilixi, we see what looks to be like stained paper. So I don't know if that was how it was printed or if that is indeed, if the deck itself was stained. We see this little spot here. Picks up in Marco's. Doesn't, oh yeah, we get it in this one too. But as I mentioned, the orange in the Peterson is a little bit toned down, more like a salmon. Here we have a little bit like a similar in color there as here. This one's just a little bit darker. I will notice some variation in the ordering of this deck, which, you know, it's not uncommon. A lot of decks had a variety of different orders, numeric orders. And here we see an example of the difference in the order. We have Justice as 7 rather than 8. The only reason I didn't pick the Vieville Justice card for my top tarot trumps that, video that Masha did was because it was 7 and not an 8. And I really did try to limit myself to 5 cards rather than showing 6 or 7, but otherwise, had she been an 8, she would have been definitely one of my choices. We have a slightly skewed scale. She's looking right at us. She's got the wings, so she had all the other ingredients. 8 is the Chariot. Look at his face. He's got a face you'd like to smack, right? I'm not a violent person. It's just a matter of speaking, but he's got a face I'd like to say, what are you looking at, dude? Anyway. So it's interesting, too, because we see the scalloped edge of TDM1, but the lack of a blindfold on Cupid. Okay, 9 in this case is Fortitude, whereas typically we would see it as 11. Now, some might argue that this card was printed in reverse, in which case, had it been, it would be 11. But that doesn't explain the 7 and 8 by, of the strength and, Justice and the Chariot, right? Reversing these two cards wouldn't account for the difference in numeric value, right? So who knows? Who knows what happened? It might have just been purely intentional, being given these numbers. Oh, I'm sorry. I must be dehydrated. My hands are like real stiff. So here we see smudges in the same spot by Marco and Sivilixi, but it's not present here. We don't see it in the Peterson. And the Hermit is 11 instead of 9. They're all really, really close. As I mentioned, the Peterson is the only one that's a little brighter. Now we see that these other two publications present us with the Hanged Man in the reversed position, right? As being the upright, or, well, it's confusing, right? But usually the Hanged Man had been presented in this way because it is a Hanged Man. This is an Italian game, and so the Hanged Man was an Italian motif, right? But as a consequence, it seems, when it was printed in the correct position, it ended up that the number for 12 would have been wrong. So perhaps, so who knows when the numbers were put on? If the number was put on after the image was printed, I don't know how it was done. But apparently, in order for the number to be correct, the Hanged Man is upright, like he's standing, which I guess the occultist assumed was the intended position because they, if you recall, they failed to recognize or realize that Italy was the inventor of the game, so they wouldn't have noticed or realized that this perhaps was the consequence for inappropriate behavior. Notice that he's got the tedium one hands behind his shoulders. So they took it to mean that he was upright and he was walking, and that this was a snake, and that kind of thing. Okay, we have death at 13, which is what we're used to seeing. I guess in any translation they get the 13th card would be death. And we see the little extra splotch in all three. But again, in the Peterson, the color is a little less dirty orange. In all three, we see the remnants of a stained piece of paper. I hope I got these mixed up. So in all three, we see that there was a stain on the paper. This might not be so easy to see in person, but it's there. Temperance is 14. But again, there is evidence that this indeed was printed in reverse, because there's no reason for the words to be written backwards, right? I mean, clearly it should have been Sol Fama, right? So there is evidence that in some of these cards, were printed backwards, but we just don't know if they all were or which ones were. Which is why the Fleur Noir deck is very interesting, because Fleur Noir only recreated the Triumph cards of the Vieville. And when he published his deck, he put them in the order that, or the direction that he thought was correct, and then the direction that was indeed what was printed. So I'll be showing that one in the next video. So, it's really, a lot of times when deck makers will recreate a deck and say the blotch is out of the bubble or something like that, they'll just put the color inside the bubble instead of letting it be. But these deck creators honor that this is the way it was. This is the way it appeared, and it's the way they do it. And all their little blotches. So I've mentioned many times that, it's awesome to have a deck that's been recreated and cleared up and clarified and is bold. Sometimes it's really nice to have a deck that's really graphic, But it's also extremely nice. And, I prefer to have a historically accurate deck because there are so many little idiosyncrasies that might appear that might just lend themselves to a reading. Plus, I always appreciate knowing how a deck really exists. Again, you see these colors are closer. And in the moon card, we have the woman spinning thread. When we saw this in another deck, and was it an Italian deck? I'm sorry, my memory is not letting me remember. It was for the sun card, not the moon card. Now, it might, again, have been a decision made, a conscious decision, because perhaps thread work was seen as woman's work, which was also associated with the moon, like a woman, right? So it's possible it was a deliberate decision to put this image with the moon. Whereas in reality, this would be work that a woman would do in the daytime, in the daylight, which would explain why it appeared as the sun card in other decks. I think, whichever one of these decks you were to buy, you could say it was a facsimile, because they all three honor very, 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 very closely. They present themselves in much the same way. We see all the same, runs with the ink and we see the misaligned, it's just that they're just, they didn't recreate these cards. They photographed them. And we have the World card, and then the Fool will be last in this sequence. So here we go. All right, now we're already at like 23 minutes, so, and I know a lot of you drop out long before the end of my videos, but this might be a good time to ask you to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd appreciate it. It's one way I'm able to keep my channel free, not require membership or anything like that. I've resisted that urge for a long time, and I'd appreciate your support in allowing me to do that by showing that you appreciate my videos by liking and subscribing. So I already showed this deck. Okay, now see the Queen, for example, the Queen of Swords. You see there's splotches all over. Now, when we get the Sivilixi and we go to the Queen of Swords, we'll also see the same splotches on her face, on her card, there on the side and in her face. But when we see the Peterson in this case with the Peterson, we see that he cleaned that up. So we don't see the splotches. So in that way, you know, the Peterson, aside from the fact that it's slightly smaller, you know, we can see that you know, it wasn't photographed as, you know, as accurate. You know, it was photographed, but then he made a decision to, I guess, clean up what he thought was a distraction. The smudge in her face, right? And the blops on the side. Oh my goodness, I dropped one of my coins. Oh my God, it exists all these years and then I drop it on the floor. Okay, let's see if there's any others that might have splotches that aren't shown. Let's do a random check. Let's see if this little splotch at the foot of the valet of batons okay, we have a little splotch on the Sivilixi as well. And I bet you it's not here on this one. Let's see. No, it's not. And we'll just do another random spot check and just see. And it might be fine, you know, you might not really mind that it, you know, the Peterson is missing those splotches. But it does prevent it from being, there's another couple splotches here in the page of coin. It does prevent it from, you know, being a real close facsimile. It's a facsimile perhaps, but it's not real close. Okay, so here, again, in the Peterson, we don't see those little splotches. But I bet we see it in the Sivilixi. Yep, there they are. We see those splotches here and here and here and there. This is the Marco and this is the Sivilixi and this is the Peterson. So all the little splotches here and here and here are missing on the Peterson, but are in the other two decks. So this is how Marco's deck compares with two other decks that are typically considered facsimile decks. And I hope you enjoyed this video. And my next video will be comparing the Vieville of Marco with the Fleur Noir and with the Tarot Sheet Revival by Sullivan Hismans. Those two are not facsimile decks, but they're also beautiful decks. So I want to show those. Until next time, friends, peace, stay well, be kind, and do no harm.